Carefully look at this photo. This is Martin Luther from Germany. In 1517, Martin Luther stood against the Catholic Church, exposing indulgences and corruption. This moment sparked a great religious reform movement in Europe known as the Protestant Reformation. During this wave, different theologians gave their own interpretations of Christianity. While Luther's ideas were spreading across Europe, a young Frenchman named John Calvin was quietly studying law and theology. Born in 1509, Calvin grew up in a Catholic family, but as he studied the Bible, he became convinced that salvation comes by God's grace alone, not by human works. Because of persecution in France, Calvin fled to Geneva, Switzerland, where he began writing what became his life's greatest work, The Institutes of the Christian Religion. This book didn't just criticize the Catholic Church. It laid out a complete system of theology, explaining God's sovereignty, human sin, salvation, and the Christian life. If you notice carefully, the word Calvinism itself comes from Calvin's surname. So now that we've seen how Calvinism began, let's understand its beliefs, the very reason it has been both influential and controversial. At the center of Calvin's theology was the belief that God is absolutely sovereign. Nothing happens by chance. Every detail of life, even salvation itself, is under God's control. Calvin also taught about human depravity. Humanity, he said, is not just a little sinful. Instead, sin has corrupted every part of us, our thoughts, our desires, and our will. That means no one can truly choose God on their own. Left to ourselves, we are spiritually dead. And then came Calvin's most famous and most controversial doctrine, predestination. Predestination means that before the foundation of the world, God sovereignly chose those who would be saved, the elect, and passed over others. This doctrine is grounded in passages like Ephesians chapter 1. He chose us in him before the foundation of the world, having predestined us to adoption as sons, in Romans chapter 8. Those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. According to Calvin, long before creation, God had already chosen some people for salvation, while passing over others. For Calvin, this teaching wasn't meant to frighten people, it was meant to comfort believers. If God has chosen you, then your salvation is secure, not because of your strength, but because of his eternal decision. Calvin's ideas quickly spread beyond Geneva. His city became known as the Protestant Rome, a training ground for pastors and missionaries. In France, his followers became known as the Huguenots, who faced heavy persecution. In Scotland, the fiery preacher John Knox embraced Calvin's teachings and helped establish the Presbyterian Church. In the Netherlands, Calvinism became deeply rooted, shaping Dutch society and politics. In England, Calvinist influence helped form the Puritan movement, which later shaped early American colonies. Calvinism wasn't just theology, it became a cultural force, influencing politics, education, and even ideas of democracy and the work ethic. But not everyone agreed with Calvin. Some Christians, later called Arminians after Jacob Arminius, argued that God's grace allows humans to freely respond. They believed salvation involves human choice, not only God's predestination. This tension came to a head at the Synod of Dort in the Netherlands, 1618 to 1619. Church leaders gathered to settle the debate, and the result was a strong defense of Calvinist teaching. From this meeting came the famous 5 points of Calvinism, remembered with the acronym TULIP. T. Total depravity. Humans are completely fallen and cannot choose God on their own. U. Unconditional election. God's choice to save is not based on anything we do. L. Limited atonement. Christ died specifically for the elect. I. Irresistible grace. When God calls someone, they cannot ultimately resist his grace. P. Perseverance of the saints. Those God has chosen will remain in faith until the end. But here the question arises, why do many people see predestination as good news? Because if God has chosen you, then your salvation isn't based on your fragile willpower or your ability to stay faithful. It rests on God's unchanging decision. And that means your salvation cannot be lost. For many believers, this is the ultimate comfort. Yet, others find this doctrine troubling. The main concern is the question of fairness. If God chooses some and not others, does that mean he withholds salvation from people who genuinely want it? Critics argue this challenges our understanding of God's love and justice. And so, is predestination good news? From a Calvinist perspective, yes, it's the best news, because your salvation depends on God's unshakable choice, not your fragile will. From a non-Calvinist perspective, it can feel like troubling news, because it raises questions about God's fairness and human freedom. From the 1500s until today, Calvinism has remained one of the most powerful and controversial theologies in Christianity. Some find incredible comfort in its message, that salvation is secure in God's hands. Others struggle with its implications, questioning God's justice and human freedom. But one thing is certain: Calvinism changed the course of history, shaping churches, nations, and countless lives.